The organ's last note hung in the vaulted air when Ezra rose from the front pew. He didn't even glance at the casket where Richard lay. His voice carried sharp against the stone walls. "The mansion is mine. Father promised me. $70 million worth of bricks and land. Mine." Gasps rippled through the mourners. "I'm Margaret Whitmore. I'm 62. And in that instant, my knees almost buckled. The scent of lilies mixed with candle wax pressed into me, sickly sweet, as every eye swung between Ezra and me. My own son had chosen this moment, before the grave closed, to declare ownership like reading a deed aloud. Beside me, Mr. Dalton shifted, the scrape of his polished shoes grounding me. He leaned and whispered, "Not today. Breathe." His leather folder brushed my arm, a quiet reminder of the trust papers Richard had signed. But Ezra's stare bored through me, daring me to collapse in front of them all. I thought of the years Richard and I had spent sketching the Great Hall, planting roses by hand, building not just walls, but meaning. Now my son treated it as collateral for debts I could already sense. My throat burned, but I steadied. One truth flashed. This battle would not end here, and I would not shrink. If you had been in my seat, mother, widow, betrayed in public, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The whisper of Ezra's claim still clung to me as we left the church. Outside, mourners avoided my eyes, some patting my shoulder, but quickly stepping away, afraid to be caught between mother and son. I held my handbag close, feeling the weight of Richard's old fountain pen inside, one of the few anchors left. The autumn wind lifted the hem of my black dress, the same one I had worn to Richard's last board dinner when Ezra had sulked in the corner because his father wouldn't cover another failed investment. That dinner should have been a warning, but I had told myself, he'll grow out of it. Ezra had always loved the performance of power more than its practice. When he was 28, he demanded a new BMW to show clients we're not provincial. Richard refused, and Ezra didn't speak to us for weeks. Later came the credit cards, $18,000 racked up in 6 months on restaurants and clubs, always paid down from the family account. Richard muttered but signed the checks, muttering about keeping peace. Each time, I let it pass, smoothing the edges. But smoothing had turned to erasure. Last spring, at a garden party, he made his contempt public. A guest had asked about my work with the community library, and Ezra laughed, loud enough for the table to hush. "Mother's little charity?" he said, raising his glass. "She thinks books are going to change the world, while the real asset is right there." He pointed toward the mansion across the lawn. The sting of humiliation seared hotter than the sun on my skin. I had pressed my napkin to my lap, hiding trembling hands. I should have confronted him then. Instead, I swallowed it. The pattern was too old. Ezra demanding, Richard placating, me absorbing the insult. It escalated in subtler ways, restricting which friends I invited, questioning my spending. Last June, he intercepted an invoice for repairs on the East Wing roof, waving it at me in the hall. $5,000 for shingles? You need approval before you sign anything. This isn't your little hobby. His tone carried the same contempt as the library remark, but sharper, aimed to cut. What I didn't know until later was that Ezra had already pledged the house, at least in talk, to a lender circling his gambling debts. I only sensed it in fragments, a hushed phone call, the click of the study door, the vibration of his phone as he pocketed it when I entered. A bank notification flashed once on his screen, large numbers, negative balances, but he turned it face down before I could see. The mansion had become not a home, but a chip he shuffled in secret games. By the time Richard's heart failed, the stakes were cemented. I stood at the graveside not just as widow, but as obstacle, a barrier between Ezra and his imagined salvation. The scent of roses we had planted together rose from the earth, but all I felt was the pressure of eyes, of debts unspoken, of a son who saw me less as mother and more as gatekeeper to a fortune. And still, the leather folder in Mr. Dalton's hand pressed reassurance into my palm. It told me there were boundaries now. Ezra's voice might echo, but his grip would not be unchecked. The first public crack had appeared, and it was only the beginning. The weeks after the garden party felt heavier than winter. Ezra moved through the mansion like a conqueror, his voice loud, his demands sharper, as though speaking louder could make his claim true. I kept mostly to the gardens, pruning roses that bloomed despite neglect, grounding myself in their stubborn rhythm. They reminded me of Richard's words. Hold steady, Zara. Let patience be your shield. But patience is not silence, it is preparation. Ezra grew bolder. One evening, I walked into the dining room to find Claudia at the head of the table, her heels perched on a chair rung, a glass of my crystal goblet in her hand. We'll renovate the east wing first, she was saying. Guests expect grandeur, not dust. Ezra nodded eagerly, as if her word carried more weight than mine. When she noticed me, she smiled too sweetly. Mrs. Whitmore, you must agree the house could use a younger touch. I said nothing. Instead, I took the fountain pen from my pocket, uncapped it, and wrote a note in the margin of the ledger I carried. Claudia's smirk faltered for half a second. She wanted a sparring partner. I refused to give her one. Nights grew longer. Bills began arriving addressed to Ezra, consultants, decorators, event planners. None paid. I kept them stacked in a drawer, marked with dates, each envelope a reminder of his noise against my silence. The household staff, once loyal to Richard, shifted uncomfortably when Ezra barked orders. They looked to me with quiet questions in their eyes. I answered with steadiness, never letting my voice crack. One afternoon, Dalton arrived. His silver hair gleamed in the late light, his leather briefcase tucked under his arm. We sat at the oak table where Richard had once sketched the mansion's first designs. Dalton laid the trust papers out carefully, smoothing the edges. Ezra grows reckless, he said, but reckless men often trap themselves. This, he tapped the parchment, remains your anchor. It is airtight, Zara. He cannot undo what Richard prepared. I ran my fingers along Richard's signature, the ink slightly raised from the paper. My throat tightened. He will try, I whispered. Dalton's gaze was steady. Let him. Every attempt will show the world more of who he is. That night, I walked through the mansion's hallways alone. The portraits lining the walls seemed to watch me, Richard's among them, his painted eyes steady, reminding me of promises spoken in firelit rooms. I paused before his portrait, the fountain pen warm in my hand. You knew, I murmured. You left me strength in silence. The next morning, Helen arrived unannounced. She had always been more than a friend. She was an anchor. She set her handbag on the kitchen counter and fixed me with the same sharp gaze she once leveled from the bench. Zara, she said firmly. Ezra is escalating. Don't let grief soften your edge. I poured her tea, my hands steady. He believes shouting will wear me down. Then don't shout back, she replied. Show him the difference between noise and resolve. Later, her granddaughter Lily wandered through the halls with wide eyes, her notebook in hand. This house feels alive, she said, running her fingers along the carved banister. It deserves to be protected. Her youth, her certainty, breathed something new into the mansion's heavy air. That night, as the sun bled red across the horizon, I stood at the balcony with the roses below swaying in the wind. Ezra's voice drifted faintly from inside, arguing with Claudia about money he did not have. I pressed the fountain pen to my palm, its weight small but grounding. Richard had built the mansion brick by brick. Ezra believed he could seize it word by word. But between bricks and words stood me, patient, silent, steady. The storm was gathering. I would not move. Ezra's footsteps grew louder in the mansion with each passing day, like an unwelcome drumbeat. The air thickened, the walls once filled with Richard's laughter now carrying Ezra's orders and Claudia's sharp whispers. My silence had unsettled them, but it had not stopped them. And then came the break. It was a Thursday afternoon when Ezra stormed into the great hall with Claudia at his side. She carried her phone raised casually, her nails tapping the screen. I recognized the gleam in her eyes, a performance. "Mother," Ezra began, his voice raised so the phone could catch every syllable. "You've delayed long enough. This house was meant for me. Everyone knows it. Stop clinging to what isn't yours." Claudia angled the phone toward my face, pretending to fix her hair. She wanted my image, defensive, desperate, to plaster across whatever courtroom or newspaper they chose. I stayed rooted near Richard's portrait. My hand rested lightly on the fountain pen in my pocket, its weight a reminder of vows unspoken. "This house was built by love," I said evenly, "not greed." Ezra laughed, brittle and jagged. "Love doesn't pay debts. Love doesn't matter in court." He stepped closer, lowering his voice as though the phone wasn't listening. "If you don't hand over the deed, I'll make sure the world sees you as a bitter widow hoarding wealth. You'll be humiliated." My heart beat hard, but my voice stayed steady. "You're not building a future, Ezra. You're burning everything left in your hands." Claudia's lips curled in satisfaction. She whispered, "Perfect," into her phone, as though the recording was going exactly to plan. Ezra jabbed a finger toward the locked drawer in the study where the trust waited. "You can't hide behind scraps of paper forever. When the press hears my side, when the judge listens, you'll be exposed." His words echoed, but behind them, I heard desperation. I had seen it before. Late nights, hushed phone calls, his shoulders heavy with debts he never confessed. He wasn't fighting for legacy. He was drowning, clawing at anything to stay afloat. I stepped closer until Claudia's phone caught the sharp clarity of my eyes. "What I will not do," I said softly, "is reward betrayal. If you want to fight, Ezra, fight in the open. But know this, I will not yield." The silence that followed was electric. Claudia's confident smirk wavered. Ezra's jaw clenched so hard I thought it might break. Then he spat. "You'll regret this." He turned on his heel, Claudia scrambling after him. Their footsteps pounded against the marble until the front door slammed shut, the sound reverberating like thunder. I stood alone in the great hall, my breath trembling but unbroken. My hand brushed the folder on the side table. The leather was warm under my palm, as though Richard himself steadied me. That night, the newspapers carried Ezra's version. A photograph from the funeral splashed across the front page, me pale with grief, Ezra tall at my side. The caption stung. "Widow hoards $70 million mansion, son denied his legacy," neighbors whispered. A woman at the florist muttered just loud enough for me to hear. "Imagine keeping your own son from his inheritance." Each word cut, but none pierced. Dalton arrived with the petition Ezra had filed, his voice calm, but eyes fierce. "He's arguing incapacity, Zara, that you're unfit to manage the estate." Lily leaned forward, fire in her eyes. "And Claudia is feeding it to the press, but gossip won't stand against proof. We'll show them the debts, the lies, the truth." Helen placed her hand over mine. "Do not let shame touch you. Your silence is stronger than their noise." I nodded, my resolve hardening. Ezra thought humiliation would break me. What he never understood was that silence can be sharper than shouting. In the quiet of the mansion that evening, I lit a single candle by Richard's portrait. Shadows danced across his painted face. "You knew this storm would come," I whispered, "and you gave me the means to endure it." The flame flickered, steady against the draft. Outside, the headlines screamed. Inside, I stood firm. The courthouse steps buzzed with reporters, their flashes like lightning trapped in daylight. Dalton walked beside me, his silver hair catching the sun. In my hand, the leather folder felt heavier than stone. I lifted my chin. If Ezra wanted the world to see me broken, he would be disappointed. Inside, the courtroom hummed with curiosity. Ezra sat at counsel table, his suit crisp, his eyes burning with defiance. Claudia lingered behind him, poised like a queen awaiting her crown. Blackwood leaned forward, his voice smooth as he painted me fragile, sentimental, incapable of managing the estate. "This house," he declared, "must pass to the rightful heir." Dalton rose, slower, steadier. He opened the folder and laid the trust before Judge Ramirez. "Your Honor, Richard Whitmore prepared for this moment. The mansion is not subject to probate. It is secured under his wife's stewardship, shielded from recklessness and debt." The judge's eyes moved along Richard's signature. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Ezra shifted, his jaw tightening, whispering urgently to Blackwood. Dalton pressed on. "This is not devotion. It is desperation. The petitioner promised what he did not own." He held up the bank records Lily had traced, loans tied to dangerous names, signatures signed in haste. "This is no legacy. It is leverage." Ezra shot to his feet, his hand slamming the table. "Lies! She poisoned him against me. My father wanted me to have it." His voice cracked, rage spilling through the quiet room. Judge Ramirez struck his gavel. "Control yourself." But Ezra could not. He jabbed his finger at me. "She manipulated everything. She's clinging to stone walls while I fight for my future." His words fell heavy, but the silence that followed was heavier still. Then Claudia stood. Calm, polished, she handed a flash drive to the bailiff. "Your Honor, I have a recording." Ezra spun toward her, disbelief flooding his face. "Claudia, don't you dare!" The speakers hissed, and then his voice filled the room. "The mansion is just a ticket out. Once it's mine, the debts disappear. My mother can rot in it for all I care." Gasps swept the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously. Ezra staggered back, pale, his bravado collapsing. Claudia returned to her seat, her expression cool, as if she had only brushed dust from her sleeve. Judge Ramirez's gaze cut sharp. "This trust predates decline. It is valid, witnessed, notarized. The petition is denied. The property remains under Mrs. Whitmore's stewardship. Creditors may pursue Mr. Whitmore alone. This estate is protected." The gavel struck once, final and unyielding. The courtroom exhaled all at once. Dalton touched my hand briefly, steady. Lily closed her notebook, her eyes shining with fierce pride. I rose, gathering the folder. As I passed Ezra, he stared at me, broken, searching for something I could not give. I did not gloat. I did not falter. Silence had carried me this far. Silence would carry me through. Outside, the sky had cleared. Cameras swarmed, microphones thrust forward. I paused at the steps, meeting the lenses head on. "A home is not a ransom," I said. "It is a promise kept." Then I walked on, the storm at last behind me. The mansion exhaled when I returned, its silence no longer heavy but whole. Richard's portrait watched from the great hall, his eyes calm, as though he had waited for this moment. The trial was behind me, the trust had held. Yet victory did not feel like triumph. It felt like release. I walked through each room slowly, my hand trailing along the carved wood, the marble, the windows where sunlight poured in. This was not just stone. It was love made solid, years of laughter, quarrels, holidays, and quiet nights now preserved against hunger and noise. Ezra had tried to turn it into ransom. The court reminded him, and me, that a home is a promise, not a prize. But even in victory, my heart ached. I thought of the boy Ezra once was, the child who clung to me in thunderstorms. That boy was gone, replaced by a man undone by his own choices. Some wounds cannot be healed by shelter. Some lessons must be carried in the cold. So I turned to what Richard always wanted: renewal. With Dalton's guidance, I began shaping the Whitmore Foundation, a way to make the mansion more than memory. Education for youth, shelter for widows, gardens for neighbors. Richard said this house should never be a monument. Now, it would breathe again. One evening, as dusk lit the roses outside, Dalton placed a final letter in my hands. Richard's words, written long before the storm. Zara, our house was built to carry love. Let it be light. Tears came then, not from fear, but from gratitude. His trust had been more than law. It had been faith in me. If you are watching this, carry this truth with you. Silence is not weakness. Patience is not surrender. And legacy is not wealth. It is dignity. If you've faced betrayal and still found the strength to stand, share your story. Subscribe to Roots and Secrets so we can remind the world together. Storms will come, but love built brick by brick can endure.